Well, tonight we have the extraordinary opportunity to be in the presence of Ron Petersen, an incredible story, an incredible man, and you know, I just want to thank you for coming all the way up from California, taking your time and sharing with the listening audience here your experiences that you've had over the last 2 years on the Inner Light program, the supplements, and a challenge, a significant challenge that you've had, that you had to deal with, which was life-threatening. And maybe you could just start out, you know, to get me going here a little bit, or at least get us going on our discussion, you know, how this all came to be, how we met, you know, and I'll just let you take it away, okay?
I'll probably develop the story in a chronological manner. I was diagnosed with cancer, bladder cancer, in August of 1998, and it was a stage 3 to stage 4 bladder cancer, fairly progressed. Previous to the diagnosis, about 6 months or 7 months previous to that diagnosis, my general practitioner had noticed a little trace of blood in the urine, but because of HMOs and the way they operate not to treat instead of to treat, and that's how they make money. So consequently, any examination or further treatment of the blood in the urine was put off until the time that that the cancer was diagnosed. And about 2 months prior to that, blood clots were coming out in my urine, and it developed into straight blood, which was very disconcerting. And even at that point, my general practitioner thought it was a athletic injury, because I work out a lot and run and do exercycle and things like that, and so he thought it was still something that had to do with maybe a groin injury or something like that. Mm-hmm. Consequently, though, because of the serious bleeding and clotting, I was referred to a urologist who had an X-ray done, and they found that I had a tumor in my bladder at the opening from the ureter to the bladder from the right kidney that covered the whole ureter, and it actually stopped up the flow of the juices from the kidney down the ureter and into the bladder. And that's why my blood pressure was about 200 over 155, because the kidney functions to help balance your blood pressure. After they took the first X-ray, obviously it became a issue, because all tumors in bladders are cancerous. And thereafter, I met with a urologist again, and a procedure was set up for me to have a cystoscopy, where they go into the ureter, to the urethra up to the bladder, and use a scope to look inside the bladder and determine what's going on in there. Well, the result of that cystoscopy was very negative, actually positive if you want to talk about cancer. He took quite a few biopsies of the tissue in the bladder, and it was determined that the cancer was well advanced, and the cancer was diagnosed as transitional cell carcinoma, which is the fastest growing type of cancer that we know of. Consequently, I was referred to an oncologist for chemotherapy. The interesting part of all this is that from the time the cancer was diagnosed until the time I had the cystoscopy, until the time I started the chemotherapy, was about a 4-month period. And you would think if you have a fast-growing transitional cell carcinoma, they'd get you in there and get you out, but they didn't. And it was kind of a difficult time. And we tried to push the procedures forward a little bit faster, but to no avail, because that's the way the HMOs and the medical system works. Consequently, we did have a meeting with the oncologist. Do you all know what an oncologist is? Oncologist is the person who prescribes the chemotherapy. And he set about a regimen of chemotherapy with me that would probably kill a horse. The 4 strongest types of chemotherapy. I refer to them now as poison, known to man.
So what was your emotional state at this time? I mean,
Well, my emotional state was I was terrified because they'd given me about 6 months to live.
okay.
Yeah,
That's
I wouldn't be here if it weren't for meeting you and being introduced to the Inner Light system. But to regress a little bit, as it has become more apparent to me because of my introduction to Dr. Young and the Inner Light program, chemotherapy is toxic to your body. And the reason you have cancer is because you are already toxic. So chemotherapy is placing toxins on top of toxins. And it just makes things worse. And in addition to that, it destroys your immune system. And your immune system is what you need to fight the cancer. So we were doing everything backwards. Of course, those are things that I found out later, not earlier. I want to read a little something here that I jotted down before we sat down for this discussion. And just to outline for you some of the thought processes that I went through as we approached the chemotherapy treatment. We are conditioned, and therefore we are predisposed to the utilization of traditional Western medicine. We need to take advantage and we need to take charge of our own well-being. This doesn't mean that I think we should ignore appropriate traditional medicine. But it does mean that we need to take charge of our own physical health and our well-being. And this is something that I didn't do at first because I was too scared, and I had a history of being conditioned to the traditional Western medical aura. So I went forward with the chemotherapy without asking appropriate questions, and certainly the doctors don't tell you about any of the
side effects.
or
do they? I mean, they know about the side effects, but do they really know the complete outcome of some of the chemotherapy treatments?
Well, as it turns out in our discussions, chemotherapy and all treatments of cancer treat only the symptoms. As Dr. Young has explained in many of the discussions we've had so far, chemotherapy and other treatments for other diseases treat symptoms, not the cause. Dr. Young and the Inner Light program treats the cause. And that's what I didn't know. Consequently, I started the chemotherapy, and it went on through November and December of 1998. I was extremely ill, had temperatures of 106 degrees, had to go to the hospital. My body completely rejected the chemicals, and my reaction, I won't go into all the details, but my reaction was so severe that the oncologist had to take me off after 2 series of chemotherapy, one in November and one in December of 1998. After he took me off the chemotherapy, he had another MRI, and the MRI showed that the tumor, which was large to begin with, was still there in the same form, and the bladder was still in the same form as it had been to begin with. The chemotherapy hadn't worked, and it was told to myself and my wife that we had a 75% chance of success with this particular regimen. Obviously, it didn't work. So he got together, the oncologist got together with my urologist surgeon and decided the only alternative was to remove the bladder. And they only gave me a 50-50 chance at that point because the MRIs had indicated that the tumor had penetrated the bladder wall and lymph nodes were affected, and that probable that the lymph node system would be fully engaged in cancer. And therefore, even with the removal of the bladder, things didn't look too good. Previously, to open up the ureter opening to the bladder, they had to put a stent through my back. Do you all know what a stent is? It's kind of like a straw and sharp. They had to put a stent through a radiologist performs this procedure. Through the stent through the back, down through the kidney, down through the ureter, and into the opening into the bladder to relieve the pressure from the kidney so that the kidney could drain and allow my blood pressure to balance. That was done prior to the chemotherapy. And so all during this time, the stent was in there, uncomfortable. The procedure was uncomfortable. And then after the chemotherapy, further MRIs showed that there was a spot on my L2 vertebrae that they thought was also indicative of bone cancer. So I had to do a bone biopsy, which was an uncomfortable procedure also. The bone biopsy came back negative, however, much to our glee. But still, the surgeon and the oncologist said that my only chance was to have the bladder removed, at the same time remove the prostate, and you all know what all that means. It means a bag on your hip to walk around with the rest of your life if you in fact live. So my wife and I told the oncologist that we would really have to think about this. During this time, I met a gentleman in San Diego, where we were living, who had lymphoma about 10 years ago. And he had gone to an alternative practitioner in Mexico and had gone through a program of cleansing his body. And he had approximately 18 to 20 tumors, some the size of footballs, on his body. And after about 3 months exercise in alternative approach to the lymphoma, these tumors went away. And he went back to San Diego, and he was in such pain that the doctors wouldn't prescribe him his pain pills unless he went through some chemotherapy for a couple of months, which he did. But now, 10 years later, he's cancer-free and doing well. He turned out to be kind of a coach and an encouragement to me to look into alternative sources of treatment, if you will, for cancer. So my wife and I decided to put the medical profession, if you will, on hold. And we began looking around and researching the internet and reading as many books as we could about cancer and treatment, and specifically bladder cancer. And my sister, who's in the back row there, kind of grayish hair, she's my twin. She lives here in American Fork, as a matter of fact. We're staying with her. Her husband had prostate cancer, and he decided he wasn't going to have much to do with the medical profession at all. Now, again, I really want to emphasize, I don't have a bone to pick with the medical profession. The only thing we need to do and to understand is that we need to take charge of our own health, whatever that is. Take charge of our own health.
How about freedom of choice, or the ability to choose the type of care that we truly want?
Right.
You know,
and however, I think being able to choose the type of care that you want and need also goes hand in hand with education. So you have to be able to educate yourself about your health in general, about what alternatives are out there, and about specifically, in my case, cancer, what I needed to do to help myself. As a consequence of my brother-in-law's with Dr. Young, his PSA count went from about 30 or 35 down to 8 after he utilized the Inner Light program, went on the Super Greens, and took many of the supplements that are part of the Inner Light program. He had gone to a specialist in prostate cancer in this area, and they wanted to perform surgery right away. And my sister and brother-in-law decided that wasn't the approach that they wanted to take, and they did some research on their own and found Dr. Young's program, and that program worked significantly and fairly quickly with Garth to reduce his PSA down to a more manageable level, which it still is. And the interesting part is that they received phone calls from surgeons and doctors all over Utah Valley saying, you need to get in here and have your prostate removed or else. And he's now back in, I think it's Ohio, Cheryl? Yeah, Ohio, conducting research. He's an archaeologist conducting research. 67 years old, doing great, picture of health, couldn't feel better, practicing the Inner Light program and watching his diet, as I am. Back to my own story. consequently, my wife and I set an appointment with Dr. Young. I think it was the last week in December of 1998. In the meantime, I had lost my job. Our economic situation went from very good to very bad in a very short period of time. My wife was working for a pharmaceutical company in La Jolla, and we owned a cabin up in the mountains, a place called Idlewild, about 6,000 feet above Palm Springs, up in the pine trees, beautiful place. We were living on a boat. We'd lived on a boat for about 10 years. We're kind of adventurous peoples, and it was a great lifestyle. Anyway, because we already owned the cabin as a weekend getaway in the mountains, we found that it was economically more advantageous for us to go up and live in the cabin and make our way up in the mountains one way or the other. At this point, our mood was pretty melancholy. We were faced with my mortality, and that's a very difficult issue for a husband and wife to go through. And having been conditioned to routine, normal, Western, traditional medicine all of our lives, and considering breaking with that tradition was a big step. But we'd been doing some research, and we found out that there was a lot of people in this world that looked to alternatives to either specifically divorce themselves from medicine or at least supplement or augment what traditional medicine can offer. That's the course we chose, to supplement and augment, because there were certain things that the medical field could still provide that we wanted to have as a backup proof, if you will, and we used the MRI as that backup. And my oncologist said that he would cooperate with us and with Dr. Young in trying whatever we could on our own to make things better, but that we would monitor any growth of the cancer through intermittent MRIs, which we did, and he held to his promise. One of the things I think that we did right was get out of our stressful situations. I've been in corporate life most of my life, and my wife was in a high-stress corporate position, and we just got out, went to the mountains, and chilled out. And I believe that in and of itself was a good idea, because it lowered the stress level, it gave us time to think, it gave us time to prepare, and it gave us time to introduce ourselves to the Inner Light program. Last week in December of 1998, we met with Dr. Young for the first time. We had a look at the blood. My blood was a mess, especially after the chemotherapy. It was a mess to begin with. I'd ingested all of the crud that you could imagine over the years, that I'd not paid any attention to health. Good health was taken for granted because I'd always been a picture of health and could eat and drink about whatever I wanted to. Well, I found out that you can't do that you have to be careful about what you ingest and what you put into your body, or suffer the consequences. We did meet with Dr. Young. We had about an hour-and-a-half discussion in his office. He outlined the program to me. The 10-day fast was not as difficult as I had thought. The first 3 days, I think the third day was the most difficult, as you suggested.
Yeah.
And after that, it went a little bit easier, and I went through the cleanse for the 10 days, and I started feeling better, obviously, because some of the toxicity was going out of my body from the chemotherapy and that which I'd ingested myself over the years. Then I started on a very strict vegetable-only diet. I followed every word that Dr. Young said about this program. I ate nothing but vegetables, and very few of them were cooked, and if they were only steamed to a minor extent because the vegetables lose their nutrient value the more you cook them. Consequently, we learned through Dr. Young's program and Shelley's book of how to prepare vegetables to get along. I ate vegetables only and drank Super Green with all the supplements for 6 months.
So that was vegetables for breakfast, vegetables for lunch,
right,
and vegetables for dinner.
vegetables for dinner.
So I think what I told you is you need to go out to pasture.
Right.
You need to start grazing.
Yep. And
that's
those
what
are
I
the
think
very words. He said, you need to start grazing.
Yeah.
And it sounded kind of funny at the time, but that's true. You needed to eat grass. Salads with olive oil and with
well, a little lemon or lime.
yeah, a little lemon or lime, but
Or
we also
tomato.
the other
Use the Bragg's.
yeah,
Probably a little
Bragg's
bit of
amino
Bragg's,
acids. We use the Bragg amino acids, and that flavored things up a little bit. It has a little bit of the taste of soy without the negative parts. These salads, and when I ate, because I was starving, right? When I ate these salads,
That was his illusion. You were
Yeah,
actually feasting, I think.
okay, I was feasting. I tell you though, after that
Felt
10
like starving.
after
though,
that
right?
10 days, that salad tasted fantastic. But not carrots, because there's too much sugar in carrots.
And not
Okay.
beets.
Not beets,
too
and
much
not
sugar.
several other things. I also introduced to my program what Sue and I put together ourselves. We got a juicer, and we developed our own breakfast juice. And Sue was on the program with me. I lost 45 pounds. I went from 175 to 140. Okay? In probably, about 4 months? Something like that, about 4 months. So, but I want to tell you about the breakfast that we developed. And I think Dr. Young mentioned the ingredients earlier this morning. Spinach, a whole bunch of spinach, the whole bunch, split in half into the juicer, 2 stalks of celery into the juicer, a half a bunch of parsley into the juicer, and 1 whole huge cucumber sliced up into the juicer. Made 2 12-ounce glasses of juice. I added to that about 2 tablespoons of flaxseed oil, which is a known cancer inhibitor, and also aloe vera, about the equivalent of about a cup of aloe vera juice. That was a traditional breakfast for at least 6 months, and actually I still do that. At first, because I was so weak, my wife did the juicing, and she took 3 months off of work. Neither of us were working, so she could basically take care of me. She thought I was dying. I thought I was dying. I thought it was over with. I was scared. Did I look scared?
Well, I don't know that you look scared. I sensed the fear.
I was scared.
But rightfully so.
Well, when a doctor says you may have as little as 6 months to live, that's an eye opener.
That'll kill you.
But
just the fear.
yeah, just the stress of all that.
Fear equals acid, and acid equals death, right?
Right.
So you got to watch that fear stuff.
During this time, I was still eliminating blood clots in the urine, and that in and of itself is fearful. And Dr. Young gave me his home phone number. I would call him on his cell phone. I would call him at home at all times of the night and tell him what was going on in a very patient, understanding, calm way. He would say, "You're doing everything right." He said, "But you're going to feel some discomfort." And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You are detoxifying, totally detoxifying your body, and all those toxins going out of your body, that's going to hurt." And it hurt. My back hurt. I hurt all over. My legs hurt. My extremities hurt. Everything hurt for about 3 months, 4 months. Occasionally it still hurts because I think I'm still detoxifying, and I think that we probably always do. But I went through such a radical change in my diet that the detoxification process was also hurtful. The byproduct, it also turned out, of the chemotherapy was that my right hip is now 1.5 inches to 2 inches lower than my left hip. And I walk like this. My shoulder on this side, if you will notice my walk, and usually only my wife notices it, is that I have a slight tilt to my torso. And this is all a byproduct of the chemotherapy, thank you very much. And the doctors don't bother to tell you about that, or osteoporosis, or the effects of other side effects of chemotherapy that can result. I'm not an expert in these issues, but I feel like I have a good working knowledge and understanding of what's going on with this program. I cleansed myself and detoxified. After 5 months of nothing but vegetables, hydrogenating totally every day, another cystoscopy was set up so the surgeon could go into my bladder and have a look and see what was going on. The MRIs had showed the tumor was still there. However, instead of the tumor being placed on the bladder wall in a circular kind of way, it was suspended on a stalk, kind of like a mushroom. That had changed. The size of the tumor was still the same. I had a meeting with a urologist surgeon, and I had told him about my program with Dr. Young and how good I was feeling. And I actually told him these words: if I didn't know I had cancer, I wouldn't understand it or know it at that point. And that was 4 months after I talked to Dr. Young the first time.
That's that 120-day period of
Right.
transition that it takes to really rebuild the blood and start the regeneration process. It begins immediately,
Right.
but for the recycling process, it's about 3 to 4 months.
To bolster my confidence in all of this, we met with Dr. Young again in February and again in March. I think we met with him approximately 4 or 5 times during this initial onset of the program. Going back to my meeting in preparation for the cystoscopy in May of 1999, I was talking with a urologist who was also the surgeon and told him of the program, and he was very skeptical. And he said that my bladder was in such bad shape that the only alternative that he could recommend was complete removal of the bladder, along with the prostate and any other lymph nodes that were in the immediate vicinity of the bladder that they could get to. I don't know if you all know this, but exposure of cancer to oxygen is probably the single worst thing that can happen, and that happens by virtue of surgery, usually open surgery, but any kind of surgery will spread cancer cells. At any rate, I wanted to know the condition of my bladder. He was skeptical. I was scared. My wife was scared. But we went ahead with a cystoscopy. I was in the operating room for about 2 hours. And, of course, after that, non-compos mentis for about an hour. My wife was in the waiting room outside. The surgeon...
You okay? It's all right. Take your time.
The surgeon went out to tell my wife, can't find any cancer. He was wrong. His diagnosis was that there was no way to beat that cancer. Not only had the tumor reduced in size, but he was able to remove the tumor through the cystoscopy method, which is taking the tweezers and pulling it through the tube and taking it out piece by piece, because the tumor had degenerated. He was able to remove the stent that had been placed in my ureter and bladder 6 months earlier. He took biopsies of various parts of the bladder and almost to the kidney. All of these biopsies proved negative, totally negative. The only indication of any cancer whatsoever was the degenerated carcinoma in the remnants of the tumor that was removed. My bladder was clear of cancer. My wife tells me that he was completely without explanation. He was mystified, dumbfounded, had no idea how that could have happened. This is a urologist that's been practicing medicine and surgery, a well-known urologist, a competent individual in San Diego with Sharps Hospitals for 25 years. Well recommended. 2 weeks after the surgery, I had talked with the oncologist and made some other appointments to talk to him. Of course, I talked to Dr. Young and reported to him the good news, in addition to sending him a sample of the tumor that was removed from my bladder, the degenerated tumor, so he could do some research on that. The surgeon called me 2 weeks later because I hadn't had a chance to get back with him, and he asked me how I was feeling. Fine, thank you for the phone call. We were up at the cabin. And he said to me, I think you should now have the bladder removed. And I said, would you please repeat that? And he said, I think it's time to have the bladder removed. And I said, what for? And he said, go for the cure and have the bladder removed because bladder cancer is a recurring cancer. And I said, if I read the pathology report correct, all of the biopsies proved negative. Did I read the pathology report correct? And he said, oh yes, you read it correct. And I said, and you're recommending to me at this point that I should have my bladder removed. That's right, he said, for the cure. And there was this big, grand pause. If any of you know music, my sister's an outstanding musician and teacher. A grand pause is in music when everything stops. The overture isn't completed yet, and then it starts again in like what, Cheryl, five seconds? Something like that. Anyway, on this telephone conversation, there was this grand pause. And I said, I don't think so. And he said, well, and because he had the grand pause also, because he knows what I was thinking, that he was thinking, that I was thinking. Maybe he really wanted to take a trip to Europe on my bladder. Some months later, I had the chance to talk to the oncologist as we became friends, because whether Dr. Young knows it or not, he's a friend of Interlight, the oncologist. And the oncologist said, I don't know why the surgeon, who's a good friend of his, said what he said. He didn't have an explanation for that. After the 6-month program and after seeing Dr. Young a few more times, I started to inculcate a few other things into my diet. Soba noodles, which is a buckwheat noodle, and occasionally, as recommended by Dr. Young, only occasionally a non-yeast bread, which we bought at the health food store. And those two items tasted absolutely wonderful. And for the next 3 or 4 months, and I'm talking approximately 9 months from the beginning of the program, that still was the extent of my diet. Still taking the supplements. After about 9 months, we expanded to a few other things. We expanded to tofu, stir fries. We expanded to some other products of soy products. And we also included some whitefish, mostly cod and which you served last night, and salmon. Today, I'm eating a few other things that I probably should not. However, I'm following the program. I think the majority of my diet is the program. We go through approximately 6 heads of romaine lettuce a week. The salads, I eat salad for lunch and for dinner with whatever else we eat. We eat a piece of maybe a piece of toast in the morning with soy cheese on it. Have anybody ever tried soy cheese? You've got to get used to it a little bit, but it's not bad, especially if it's melted on top of some toast. The kind of bread that we're eating now is called Ezekiel. Unfortunately, it does have yeast in it, but it has no flour, and it's organic. And it has a little better taste to it than the yeast bread. But we've learned a myriad of things that we can eat that's consistent with Dr. Young's program, and that we can still enjoy our meals. During the week, we are fairly dedicated to the program. Every once in a while on the weekend, we'll do a pizza. My biggest nemesis is ice cream, and that and my cells calling for sugar. But we're able to contain that pretty much.
Probably the retreat has helped you to reinforce some of these ideas. We need to get back on the
I was just telling Dr. Young before we started this interview, or in my case, monologue, that coming back here after not having contact personally with Dr. Young for approximately a year now has rejuvenated my dedication to the program and to good health. What I have learned is that whenever I put something in front of me to eat that I know I shouldn't eat, I say to myself, is eating this worth one less day of my life, 1 week less of my life, or 1 year less of my life? And my answer has always been no. So what I try to do in terms of that metaphor is push it away and not eat it or drink it. I really do owe the fact that I'm sitting here to Dr. Young and Shelley and that program. It cleansed me. It gave me renewed confidence in my ability to control my own destiny and to control my health, and recognize that there are alternatives available to all of us that we need to acquaint ourselves with, and above all, ask questions. Ask questions of doctors, ask questions of Dr. Young. I believe that Dr. Young does not profess to be the greatest marketer in the world, but I do believe that he is one of the great scientists of our time. And I do believe that we must listen. And I do believe that you all that are involved in a new venture with Interlight can find it rather easy after determined study and examination to understand the concept, and in time it will become easy, and the marketing will sort itself out for you because of your education about the products that you already have, that you're educated about, and the education that you will acquire as a result of your exposure to these tapes, the readings, and all of the information that Dr. Young has at your disposal.
What an incredible story. And to be able to in the face of fear, to be able to move forward and literally step up and to do the things that were necessary in order to reclaim your inner terrain. Not buying into the disease complex theory, but literally realizing that it was an internal environment problem, not a cancer problem. The cancer was just the expression. Yes, it was localized at the weakest area of your body, but you know, I commend you and congratulate you. And Ron, I don't know if you remember this, but Shelley and I had gone on an extended research in Paris, France, and in fact, we were over there, and I think I remember you calling, and I was letting you know that we were going to be gone, and of course you wanted to know where we were going to be just in case you needed us. And it was interesting that I got a call, and of course I knew Ron wouldn't have called me unless it was something serious. And he called up, and I got the message that he had called, and so I returned the call back. And we talked for a while, and what had happened was he was experiencing, which he hadn't for several months, the return of blood back in the urine again.
Right.
And this was just prior to the tumor actually pulling off the bladder wall. Now, I didn't know that. I mean, I don't have X-ray vision, but you know, I believe in things of the spirit, and I believe that you need to listen to it because it's a small, very still voice that speaks to you. And the voice that spoke to me, which was very still and is very calm, said to me that to say to Ron, that Ron, this is the tumor pulling off the bladder wall. Now, I had no other reason other than just that sense, that voice that came to me, but I was willing to listen to that still small voice, which is a gift to all of us, if we'll but listen. In the quiet places in our room or wherever in our homes or in a place in the mountains, wherever it might be, if we'll be silent, you know, stop talking, and just be calm and listen, you'll hear a very still, small voice that speaks the words of truth. And so I heard those words, Ron, and I shared with you those. And after I shared, I even then after hanging up the phone and talking to him and saying, my God, what have I said? You know, I don't know that to be the case, but I was encouraged in the fact that this was part of the cleansing process, and that in reality what had happened was, yes, indeed, the tumor had pulled off the bladder wall, and that the cancer was, the tumor was degrading. It was pushing, because we had cellular organization and regeneration and pushing out the old cells, and of course, voila, you know, the end result.
I think I think the words he used was he said it could be that the tumor is sloughing off from the bladder wall and the tumor is disintegrating. That's the words he used. I need to share with you that chemotherapy not only affects you physiologically, but it affects your memory. And there's a lot of things that I went through during that year's period, from one spring, the spring of '98 to the spring of '99, that I just flat don't remember. And there are things that my wife brings to my attention and my sister brings to my attention that we went through that I don't recall. And I don't know this as a fact, but I suspect that the chemotherapy affects your mental capacities also. I mean, if it affects your body in general, why shouldn't it affect your mental capacities?
Yeah, the chemotherapy is a very acidic drug, and it works in electromagnetically in the positive realms, and is extremely acid, and it changes the whole context in a negative way. It sets up even further cellular disorganization. An oncologist will tell you that is totally non-discriminate. I mean, it literally sets up the cellular breakdown of both those cells which are good and those cells which are not so good.
It's a shotgun approach.
Because there's only two forms. There's a healthy form and an unhealthy form. This is how simple it is. You're either clean or you're dirty. You know, if you're sick, your terrain is filthy, it's dirty. And you clean it up through this process of alkalizing and energizing. And Super Greens and Prime pH and the BioLite are the main foundational products of that, of which Ron was willing and courageously took upon him, and through faith. And a lot of people won't believe you. You know, in other words, you know, it all starts with that little particle of faith. You know, in other words, don't believe me. Go ahead and begin the process, and as you begin the process, what was a faith becomes now a sure knowledge. See, my knowledge is sure. You came here wanting to learn. In faith, maybe there is something here that Inner Light had to offer. As you take this knowledge and apply the principles of faith and apply these principles of truth, then that knowledge, that unsure knowledge, or that faith will become a sure knowledge, and you will know, as I know, that what we are talking about here is true, and it is real, and it is lasting. Hey, I want to thank you, Ron, for
my pleasure.
The time and that you spent with us, and just hope for the best for you and continued good health.
All right. Thank you.